From early childhood, society persistently instills in us one fundamental principle: work hard and be obedient. Save your money, and in old age you will be rewarded with well-deserved rest, financial stability, and complete satisfaction. This myth is repeated everywhere, like a mantra, echoing in our homes, educational institutions, and the media. We are convinced that life is a straight line. Get an education, get a job, pay off your mortgage, retire, and only then can we begin to live life to the fullest. However, Carl Jung saw something deeply disturbing in this. He called it an illusion that systematically alienates a person from their true self. Think for a moment how many people around us sincerely believe that happiness awaits them somewhere at the end of this exhausting journey. How many people go to work every day that they hate, suppress their own needs, postpone their dreams for later, being convinced that someday the time will come when they can finally live for themselves. And then finally, that long-awaited day arrives. 65 years old. And what happens then? The body is worn out and tired. Health no longer allows you to realize long-held dreams. Relationships that have not been nurtured have long ceased to exist, and the soul is often empty, burned out, and silent. Jung stated directly, if you ignore your own inner self for decades, if you dedicate your life exclusively to satisfying the expectations of the outside world, then at the end of this path, nothing awaits you but a gaping void. And this emptiness causes unbearable pain, because it is not just the absence of something, it is a painful reminder of everything that could have happened but never did, of who you could have become but never did, of everything that your soul whispered to you for many years and you learned to ignore it. In the modern world, the idea of security is persistently promoted, but a legitimate question arises, is this true security? Or is it a carefully laid trap that deprives a person of spontaneity, sincerity, and depth of experience? Many people make deals with their own conscience for years, putting life off until later, finding excuses in the form of financial obligations, career prospects, and caring for the future of their children. Decades fly by waiting for a better life, but does it come? Often it turns out that achieving the set goals does not bring the long-awaited satisfaction. That is why retirement turns into deep depression for many. The reason lies not in the loss of work, but in the fact that throughout their lives, a person has identified themselves exclusively with the role of worker, provider, executor of someone else's will. They neglected the development of relationships with themselves, ignored the inner voice, and avoided fundamental questions about the meaning of their existence. Who am I beyond my social roles? What truly fills my life with meaning? As Carl Jung claimed, life leaves a person if they do not live in harmony with their inner self, even if biological processes continue. This is a truth that many prefer not to notice, because acknowledging it would mean realizing that their entire life is built on the shaky foundation of false beliefs imposed by the system, family, society, but not on the truth born in the depths of the soul. Look around. How many people live in survival mode, mechanically performing routine actions? They get up in the morning, go to work, come home tired, turn on the television and fall asleep, only to repeat the same scenario the next day. To the question about the meaning of this life, one can often hear the answer, that's how it should be, that's how everyone lives. Security seems to them the highest value, but is this not just an illusion of security, for which one has to pay with the most valuable coin, the loss of oneself? The oppressive realization dawns when you understand that many people postpone understanding the foundations of life until a critical moment. When health begins to fail, when loved ones pass away, when time irreversibly slips through your fingers, depriving you of the opportunity to change anything. And then a painful awakening occurs. A person looks back on the years lived and bitterly realizes that their life has turned into a long journey that has led them to a completely unwanted place, and there is no turning back. This is the very illusion of a safe life that Carl Jung warned about. the greatest lie imposed by society from generation to generation, designed to keep people in obedience. A lie that whispers, wait, now is not the right moment. It's not time to live for yourself yet. However, this later often never comes. From birth, society instills in our minds a seemingly indisputable truth. A person's value is determined by their productivity, achievements, and usefulness to others. This manifests as early as school, where children are evaluated not for their uniqueness, but for the amount of information they have absorbed, the number of tasks they have completed, and their adherence to expectations. The same trend is evident in adult life, at work, in relationships, in everyday affairs, where constant busyness has become synonymous with importance. Carl Jung viewed the world with a deep sense of unease, realizing how the relentless cult of efficiency was gradually destroying the human essence. It is worth considering how often a person is tormented by guilt in moments of inactivity, when they allow themselves a break, immerse themselves in silence, and remain alone with their thoughts. Society has instilled the idea that inaction is equivalent to laziness, that time not dedicated to production is wasted senselessly. But is this really the case? Does the soul evaluate its worth by the number of messages sent, the hours spent at work, or the size of the bank account? Jung understood that behind this mania for productivity lies a deep-seated fear, the fear of facing oneself. When a person is not consumed by tasks and has no immediate goal or objective, silence ensues, and in this silence, voices begin to sound that they would prefer not to hear, unspoken grief, suppressed aspirations, forgotten dreams, and bitter truths about life. In the modern world, work has ceased to be merely a means of providing for life, transforming into an end in itself. People dedicate decades to performing tasks that hold no genuine meaning for them. Endless meetings, project development, report writing, tight deadlines, all of this forces them to forget about their soul, which is as if locked in a dark corner, remaining quiet, forgotten, and ignored. The cult of productivity imposes the idea that a person's value is determined by their ability to produce. However, as Carl Jung questioned, what if the true value of a person is not related to their activity? What if it is unconditional and conditioned only by the very fact of their existence? The world tends to reward active endeavors and punish inaction. The acknowledgement of fatigue and the need for rest is often met with advice on the necessity of better organization. The desire to live not only for work may be met with the response that this is life and one must adapt to it. But no one asks about the state of the soul, about the search for meaning in life, and about the true self hidden beneath the burden of obligations. Jung noted that the relentless pursuit of productivity detaches people from their inner compass. Intuition is dulled, passion fades, and the meaning of life dissolves into countless tasks. How often does a person hear a quiet voice whispering, "This is not the life I dreamed of, this is not the path of my soul"? But this voice is immediately suppressed by a new to-do list, a schedule of meetings, and the fear of falling behind if one stops. Imagine for a moment what life could be like if a person dared to place the spiritual above soulless productivity. What if, instead of constantly asking, "What else should I do?" they began to ask, "What truly fills my existence with meaning?" Would they be able to withstand this encounter with the truth? Would they have the courage to admit how many actions are dictated not by internal aspirations, but by externally imposed expectations? The bitterest irony lies in the fact that people sometimes do not notice how their life turns into a joyless conveyor belt. The morning begins with waking up, followed by the commute to work, the performance of routine tasks, a short break intended only to restore strength before the next workday. Weeks, months, years, decades pass in this way, until one day a person awakens and asks themselves if this was all there was to live for. And then comes the realization that they never lived their own life, that all this time they were only fulfilling the prescriptions of a system that cares nothing for them. A system that does not know their name, their innermost dreams, their hidden fears, a system for which they are merely a faceless number in a table, an insignificant cog in a vast machine, an instrument for creating value for someone else. The eminent psychologist Carl Jung warned that a person who sacrifices their inner self for the sake of increased productivity will inevitably face retribution, and the price of this deal will be the loss of their own soul. A legitimate question arises: is it worth waiting for a critical point to realize this truth? From an early age, the obsessive idea of the need for relentless work, the abandonment of personal aspirations, time devoted to family and hobbies, is instilled in a person's mind, all for the sake of achieving an illusory paradise called retirement. At this moment, supposedly, real life begins, when one can afford rest, enjoyment of oneself, travel, and life in harmony with one's own rhythm. However, according to Jung, there is a serious danger in this widespread myth. He saw in it not a promise of long-awaited satisfaction, but a treacherous trap. It's worth pondering how often we hear the phrase, "just a little longer, only a few more years, and then the long-awaited rest will come." How many people postpone their dreams to an indefinite later, to retirement? And how many of them actually reach that moment in good health, full of energy and joy? And how many, having waited for that day, feel only an all-consuming emptiness? According to the postulates of depth psychology, the human soul does not obey the rigid framework of a work schedule and does not postpone the desire for a fulfilling life until retirement age. Every day lived in neglect of one's true needs, innermost desires, and unique calling becomes an irreplaceable loss for the soul. The soul blossoms only in a state of harmony with itself, in moments of conscious presence and authenticity. The myth of retirement, in essence, represents another tool of social control. The system convinces the individual, work tirelessly now, endure hardship, deny yourself desires, and in the future, when the best years of your life are given, you will find well-deserved happiness. However, a legitimate question arises: how valuable is happiness postponed indefinitely? Is it possible to preserve the joy of life like money in a bank vault? Carl Jung observed this phenomenon with deep concern. He encountered people who, throughout their lives, pursued the illusory promise of future happiness, but, having reached the long-awaited stop, found themselves at a loss, not knowing who they really were. For decades, they defined themselves solely through the prism of their professional activities, whether as an employee, entrepreneur, or official. With the loss of this role, the sense of meaning also disappeared. Suddenly, the absence of genuine interpersonal connections capable of supporting and nourishing the soul was revealed, the absence of hobbies that could awaken vital energy. These people lived a life that was a continuous preparation for a life that never came. Here, the darkest side of the common misconception manifests itself. C.G. Jung drew attention to the fact that retirement turns into a deep, existential shock for many. The time that was supposed to be a period of long-awaited freedom turns into a period of confrontation with a question that the individual has carefully avoided throughout their conscious life. Who am I when my usefulness to the system is exhausted? Often the answer is extremely painful. Many do not know the answer because they have never had the opportunity and space for self-discovery. That is why a significant proportion of pensioners plunge into a depressive state, are exposed to various diseases, and quickly lose their vitality. The reason lies not in old age, but in the fact that the soul, which has been ignored and suppressed for decades, suddenly appears in all its nakedness, demanding an immediate answer and truth. Imagine a person who has spent his whole life chasing goals, in continuous career growth, until one day this ladder ends. And now, standing at its top, the person realizes that all this time he was climbing the wrong ladder, that it was leaning against the wrong wall, that he devoted his best years to things that have no true value. Jung stated categorically, man cannot exist without meaning. However, meaning does not arise by magic with the onset of retirement. Meaning must be created and cultivated daily, not when the system allows you to stop working, but right now, in the present moment, while there is still strength, energy, and passion. It is worth considering whether it is really worth postponing a fulfilling life until the end of a career. Does anyone sincerely believe that life begins only with the receipt of a coveted pension certificate? Perhaps the truth is that life has always been nearby, but the person was too absorbed in the daily routine to pay attention to it. The common idea of retirement is one of the most insidious deceptions of modern civilization, a deception that deprives people of their most valuable years, poisoning their existence with false hopes for future prosperity. Carl Jung warned, "If you don't start asking yourself important questions today, tomorrow may be too late." And the main question is not when retirement will come, but when a person will finally start living for real. Carl Jung repeatedly emphasized that success, in the generally accepted sense, is not always synonymous with a fulfilling life and happiness. Modern society creates an image of a successful person as an individual who has achieved a high position, possessing material goods, prestige, and recognition in society. However, Jung noted that behind these external attributes of triumph, a completely different picture often hides: a deep, almost unbearable emptiness. This is the paradox of modern life. The more a person achieves, the more often they lose touch with themselves. Imagine the lives of those who, from a young age, followed a strictly defined path: education, work, career ladder, family, mortgage, and finally, the horizon of retirement. A life by template. This template has become a kind of roadmap, and although outwardly everything looks like a success story, inside, a feeling of emptiness begins to grow. Emptiness that Carl Jung described as a loss of self, when a person gets lost in a labyrinth of masks, social roles, and expectations, forgetting their true essence. This inner emptiness is not just a fleeting sadness or fatigue, but a deep sense of discomfort stemming from the loss of connection with oneself. Often, people who have reached the peaks of success find that despite their realized ambitions and conquered honors, their existence becomes monotonous and lifeless. They wake up in the morning with the feeling that life is constantly being postponed: dreams, hobbies, innermost desires. And the question, "Who am I really?" remains unanswered, echoing in their hearts. Carl Jung insightfully pointed out that crisis phenomena in a person's life are by no means accidental, but naturally arise from ignoring the most important process of individuation, the complex path of self-knowledge and acceptance of one's unique essence. In modern society, where in many cultures the concept of success is reduced to banal external achievements, the human soul languishes in a thirst for something deeper and more meaningful: authenticity, integrity, and harmony with oneself. Ignoring this inner balance creates a depressing feeling of emptiness, which over time becomes an unbearable burden. What exacerbates the situation is that this existential emptiness is often hushed up and skillfully masked. People who have achieved external success resort to various ways of escaping from themselves. They immerse themselves in work, strive for new achievements, abuse psychoactive substances, establish superficial relationships, just to avoid facing the awareness of inner emptiness. However, as Jung warned, all these measures provide only temporary relief, while the true solution to the problem requires courage and honesty with oneself. The biggest difficulty lies in the fact that the awakening to the awareness of this inner emptiness often comes too late, when a person is already burdened with a well-established external life and absorbed in maintaining their status quo, fearing change and confrontation with their shadow. At this moment, questions about who they really are become agonizing, and the answers painful. Many prefer to avoid these uncomfortable questions, which only exacerbates the alienation from their own essence and ultimately leads to severe existential crises. Carl Jung argued that genuine existence begins where self-deception ends. To fill the resulting gap, it is necessary to dare to delve into the depths of one's own self, explore the labyrinths of the psyche and confront the unknown, accepting both the light and dark sides of one's nature. This is a thorny path to finding integrity, which cannot be bought with money or achieved through external triumphs. The inner emptiness that haunts many successful people is not a tragic finale, but rather a persistent call to awakening, which comes with rich life experience and the realization that the true treasure lies not in external achievements, but in revealing one's true essence. Jung urged not to postpone this important process for later, because life is not an abstract future, but the present that is given to us here and now, and even painful emptiness can become a starting point for deep transformation. Carl Jung noted with concern that modern societies, mired in economic and bureaucratic mechanisms, reduce a person to the role of a faceless element in a soulless system. In such a world, the individual ceases to be perceived as a unique personality with spiritual and psychological wealth, and turns into an instrument whose sole purpose is efficiency, productivity, and unquestioning obedience. Jung warned that such treatment leads to a deep split in personality and loss of connection with one's own identity. In modern society, with its strict frameworks and prescriptions, individuals often lose touch with their authentic self. In the workplace, a person is considered primarily as an element of a functional system where efficiency and unquestioning adherence to established rules are paramount. As a result, a substitution occurs. The individual begins to perceive themselves through the prism of the work they perform, forgetting their deeper essence. However, such identification is superficial and unstable, since it is based on external factors that are subject to constant changes. The loss of professional relevance, whether due to age, dismissal, illness, or emotional burnout, often leads to a serious crisis of self-identity. The question, "Who am I if I'm no longer needed at work?" ceases to be rhetorical and calls into question the meaning of existence. A system that previously treated a person as a faceless mechanism suddenly denies them a place. The individual is left alone with an inner void that they previously tried to ignore. Jung viewed such a crisis as a turning point, opening up the possibility of liberation from the limitations imposed by the system and rediscovering oneself outside the framework of social roles and labels. However, many experience fear in the face of this confrontation, as the unknown is frightening and internal questions can be painful. The system does not provide tools for self-knowledge and spiritual development, nor does it create conditions for individualization and meeting the true self. It is precisely the loss of connection with one's own identity that is one of the key reasons for the feeling of alienation and inner emptiness that Jung defined as the psychic suffering of modern man. The modern system, with its emphasis on strict adherence to rules and maximum productivity, often neglects the innermost aspirations of the human soul. As a result, individuals, while formally occupying their place in society, experience inner emptiness and disappointment. Moreover, a personality that is entirely identified with professional activity appears extremely vulnerable and flawed. Carl Jung argued that the true self has many facets and requires purposeful work on oneself, deep self-knowledge, and acceptance of all aspects of one's nature. Otherwise, a person risks remaining a hostage of the system, deprived of genuine freedom and a fulfilling life. In a world dominated by standards of efficiency and productivity, it is crucial to find an opportunity for self-analysis and establishing contact with one's own inner world. It is in this space that the process of individuation begins, allowing one to go beyond the role of a simple performer and acquire a unique identity independent of external demands. Jung emphasized that a person who has come to know themselves and has regained their true essence becomes a powerful force capable not only of personal transformation, but also of exerting a profound and constructive influence on the world around them. They cease to be a faceless element of the system and become the creator of their own destiny. Swiss psychiatrist and philosopher Carl Jung repeatedly pointed out that the fundamental problem inherent in modern man is the deficit of genuine awareness of death, a phenomenon that is inevitable and universal. The vast majority of people build their lives on the assumption of their own immortality, as if time is an inexhaustible resource and the life path has no clear finish line. This illusion of eternal life has a decisive influence on the decisions we make and the priorities we set, often leading to actions that, when viewed through the prism of the inevitability of death, seem meaningless or even destructive. Jung argued that a deep awareness of the fragility and transience of human existence would radically change our life orientations, making them more balanced, profound, and sincere. Instead of endlessly chasing after material goods, social status, imaginary achievements, or illusory happiness, which only superficially satisfy egotistical needs, we would realize that these external attributes ultimately lose all meaning. The true value of life lies in its qualitative content, in harmonious relationships with others, in spiritual growth, and in genuine being, filled with meaning and awareness. Life without an understanding of the finiteness of existence is like a dream, where time stretches endlessly and the consequences of actions seem insignificant. A person absorbed in routine and striving for material wealth often does not think about the deeper meaning of their actions. Only a sudden collision with the reality of the inevitable end, whether it be a serious illness, the loss of a loved one, or an existential crisis, jolts them out of this stupor and forces them to think about the life they have lived. The question arises, is this really how I wanted to live the time allotted to me? Did the efforts spent on achieving goals have any meaning? Carl Jung viewed this encounter with mortality as an opportunity for deep personal transformation. Awareness of one's own mortality, despite its frightening aspect, opens the way to authentic living. It prompts a re-evaluation of values, allows one to look deep within oneself and determine what is truly important. Without this awareness, a person remains trapped in illusions and delusions, repeating mistakes and following patterns that do not lead to the fulfillment of desires or to self-realization. Carl Jung emphasized that acknowledging the inevitability of life's end is not merely an intellectual exercise, but a profound experience that demands emotional and spiritual engagement. Only when death ceases to be perceived as something abstract and distant can a person truly live authentically and to the fullest. Such awareness liberates one from crippling fear and encourages embracing life in all its fullness, with its fleeting beauty, instead of escaping into a world of superficial pleasures. According to Jung, the very absence of awareness of the finiteness of being is the root of many misguided decisions that have a detrimental effect on one's mental state, leading to disappointment, a sense of emptiness, and meaninglessness. A person who does not remember their mortality is unable to fully appreciate the present or to love, because they do not realize how precious the time allotted to them is. In conclusion, Jung reminds us that true awakening begins with overcoming the denial of death. Awareness of transience gives life a new dimension, filling it with authenticity, freedom from illusions, and allowing one to make decisions that reflect one's true essence, rather than those imposed by society or the system. According to the eminent psychologist Carl Jung, work often becomes a form of escapism for individuals, allowing them to flee from the fears, psychological traumas, and feelings of inner emptiness that torment them. In today's world, where strict demands and relentless pressure prevail, complete dedication to professional duties becomes a way to temporarily distract oneself from agonizing existential questions, such as self-identification, awareness of one's own feelings and true desires. Work, like an all-consuming element, captures attention, fills time and thoughts, thereby suppressing the anxiety that lurks in the depths of consciousness. Jung particularly emphasized that excessive concentration on external tasks and obligations represents a kind of defensive mechanism of the psyche. Instead of courageously facing their inner problems and trying to resolve them, people prefer activity that takes away their time and energy. Be busy so you don't have to feel is the unconscious principle that guides those who spend most of their lives at work. However, such a solution is illusory and brings only short-term relief. In this case, work acts as a smokescreen, hiding reality but not eliminating it. The relentless passage of time sees days turn into weeks and weeks into years, and although constant engagement in external affairs brings temporary peace of mind, the inner discomfort does not disappear. Sooner or later, there comes a point when work ceases to function as an escape. This moment may be retirement, job loss, or some other event that deprives a person of the ability to shift the burden of existence onto something else. And then the individual is left alone with themselves, with their unresolved fears and questions from which they have been running for so long. Carl Jung tirelessly emphasized that confronting oneself is an inevitable and vital step on the path to self-realization. Avoiding this encounter, trying to escape from one's own self does not bring a long-term solution, but only postpones the moment of necessary self-analysis and knowledge of the depths of one's own soul. Only those who dare to face their inner demons, who dare to explore the labyrinths of their own needs, emotions, and emotional wounds, can achieve genuine transformation. Only then will the path to finding meaning in life open up, a meaning that will not depend on external attributes of success or recognition from society, but will be the result of inner harmony and completeness. Undoubtedly, professional activity can serve as an excellent platform for personal growth and self-realization. However, when it becomes a means of escaping from oneself, it turns into a real cage, limiting spiritual development. Jung urged everyone not to forget that the most important and meaningful journey in life is the journey within oneself. It is not enough to simply act and perform tasks. One must be conscious, present in every moment, and sincere towards one's own soul. Modern society, like a nagging swarm, surrounds us with a constant noise of talk about material well-being, career achievements, prestige, and the relentless pursuit of success. These topics dominate almost all areas of communication, from family gatherings to television shows and official events. However, as soon as the conversation turns to the meaning of existence, to true purpose, to the mysteries of the human soul, or to the inevitability of death, a painful silence ensues. These questions are spoken about in hushed tones, trying to avoid deep reflection and serious discussion. Carl Jung drew attention to a specific barrier imposed by society, a taboo on discussing the most important and complex aspects of human existence. Jung deeply understood that neglecting questions of the meaning of life and spirituality does not go unpunished for humanity. A society wholly absorbed in material values deprives the individual of the opportunity to delve into self-knowledge and find true happiness. Instead of harmony with the inner self, people increasingly submit to external demands, striving for productivity, success, and recognition. Jung noted that such a mechanism creates a sense of inner emptiness, tormenting the hearts of many who, despite external achievements, experience deep dissatisfaction. This emptiness does not arise spontaneously. It is a consequence of the lack of sincere dialogue with oneself, with one's own soul. There is nothing more tragic than a life lived to please the expectations of others, contrary to one's own truth. And when the moment of realization comes, it is often too late. Many are overcome with bitter regret and disappointment that they did not dare to live in accordance with their beliefs and values. Society has an unspoken taboo on discussing the topic of death, which of course affects our perception of life. Death, as the inevitable end of existence, makes us think about the transience of time and the value of every moment. However, despite this, most people are afraid of open conversation about death. The renowned psychologist Carl Jung believed that avoiding the topic of death is one of the main reasons why people lose touch with their true essence and stop valuing life in its entirety. Insufficient awareness of mortality leads people to waste their energy on achieving false goals, losing sight of what really matters. Jung called for a bold overcoming of this social taboo, for open discussion of spiritual questions and reflections on the mysteries of life. He argued that it is in such conversations that we can find the path to realizing our true desires and aspirations. Only by daring to look death in the face and asking ourselves about the meaning of our existence can we understand what really matters. Throughout life, we learn the rules of behavior in society, learn to meet the expectations of others and social norms, but this is not enough to achieve true happiness. Jung emphasized that true wisdom is born within us from individual interaction with our own soul, from the ability to listen to its needs and accept ourselves as we are, rather than striving to conform to imposed ideals. By avoiding conversations about complexities, people not only avoid discomfort, but also deprive themselves of the opportunity to comprehend the deeper meaning of being. As a result, many complete their life journey burdened with unspoken thoughts, unrealized aspirations, and undiscovered aspects of their own personality. Carl Jung viewed this as a sad loss that could have been avoided if society allowed more frankness and sincerity in discussing spiritual and existential questions. Therefore, it is necessary to start breaking down the existing social taboo, asking ourselves and others questions about what gives life true value, what is worth fighting for, and what will remain after we are gone. Only by overcoming the fear of these questions can we find true freedom and a deep sense of meaning. Life is full of contradictions and paradoxes that sometimes seem incomprehensible. Carl Jung, an outstanding expert on the human psyche, drew attention to one of the most important paradoxes affecting almost every person. This paradox can radically change our lives if we dare to know and understand it. Jung spoke of it as a fundamental key to achieving true harmony and fulfilling desires. The deepest irony of existence is that giving up the relentless pursuit of financial well-being, public recognition, and ostentatious success, while turning to the search for true purpose, surprisingly leads to life beginning to provide all-around support, including in material terms. In real life, this manifests in the fact that when an individual stops clinging desperately to external attributes of well-being dictated by fear or social norms and begins to live in accordance with the deep, sincere needs of their inner world, events bordering on miracles begin to occur. Jung explained this phenomenon as a resonance. When a person is in harmony with their true self, with what they truly feel, what they aspire to, and who they are at their very core, their inner energy emits a certain frequency that attracts corresponding circumstances, people, and events. This inner harmony with external reality creates a unique resonance, thanks to which the surrounding world begins to respond to a person's needs and desires, often in completely unpredictable and surprising ways. However, for many, this truth remains unattainable. Instead of listening to the voice of their soul, they spend their lives chasing illusory goals such as career, wealth, and high social status, which are often imposed from the outside by public opinion and stereotypes about success. As a result, people lead an existence that does not bring them satisfaction, losing touch with their true selves, and their actions only generate disappointment and emotional exhaustion. The tragedy of the situation is exacerbated by the fact that the realization of this paradox comes to most too late, often only in moments of deep existential crisis, encounters with health problems, or the loss of loved ones. It is then, in moments of forced pause, that they ask themselves questions about their true essence, about what will remain if they discard all imposed roles and expectations, and what the true meaning of their life is. Carl Jung argued that it is from this moment that the true transformation of personality begins. The courage to look deep inside oneself and follow one's own destiny, instead of chasing illusory goals, opens the way to a qualitatively different life. This path does not promise to be easy. It will require confronting one's own fears, doubts, and perhaps loneliness. However, it is precisely this path that leads to the true realization of desires and, paradoxically, opens access to material well-being, which ceases to be an end in itself and becomes a natural consequence of living in harmony with oneself. Carl Jung persistently warned against the common misconception that success is reduced solely to external attributes, such as an impressive bank account, a high position in society, or the possession of power. True success, in his deep conviction, lies in achieving harmony with oneself, in discovering and following one's unique purpose. Only in this case does a person feel the fullness of being, when each day lived is filled with meaning and the surrounding world responds with support that previously went unnoticed. This paradox is not only a philosophical truth, but also a practical guide to life, urging us not to run away from ourselves, not to blindly obey generally accepted norms, but to listen to our inner voice and believe that, living in accordance with our true nature, the world becomes more benevolent and generous. It is a call to courage and belief in oneself, which, despite its apparent simplicity in theory, in practice requires deep involvement and conscious transformation. Ultimately, the greatest paradox of life lies in the fact that abandoning the senseless race for material goods and external recognition opens the way to a life filled with meaning and, paradoxically, leads to material well-being and abundance. Jung urged us not to postpone the comprehension of this truth to an indefinite future, but to begin discovering it for ourselves here and now, because life does not wait, and time is the most valuable gift we possess. In every person's life path, there inevitably comes a turning point of self-analysis, when a question, imbued with existential acuteness, is born deep in the soul. Why didn't I dedicate my life to myself? This question, like an echo, most often sounds on the threshold of retirement, when the feverish rhythm of everyday life and professional obligations subsides. However, for many, this realization comes too late, becoming, in Jung's words, the tragedy of modern man. For many years people, like puppets, obey the expectations of family, the demands of work, and social norms. Their days are filled with performing tasks, earning a living, and striving for social recognition. In this hustle and bustle, there is rarely time to reflect on one's true essence, on the innermost desires and aspirations of the soul. Work, responsibilities, and an endless stream of worries overshadow genuine dreams and aspirations, turning life into an endless series of fulfilling other people's prescriptions. Jung emphasized that it is precisely this unconsciousness, this lack of reflection on oneself and on the meaning of one's existence, that leads to a deep identity crisis in adulthood. When people retire and suddenly find themselves alone, deprived of their usual routine and social roles, they are overcome by a feeling of great emptiness. Then the question arises, full of bitterness and regret. What was it all for? Why didn't I live for myself? A question that should have been asked much earlier, becoming a compass guiding the life path. According to the eminent Swiss psychologist Carl Jung, the true tragedy of human existence lies not at all in the finitude of being. It is far more disheartening to realize that countless individuals never truly embark on the journey of life, failing to discover their own unique purpose, to uncover the truth hidden within the depths of their souls, and to experience genuine fulfillment from realizing their innermost desires. They spend their days skimming the surface, embodying alien patterns of behavior and social roles imposed from the outside, without bothering to heed the quiet but persistent voice of their own inner self. Jung anxiously noted that such a state of existential slumber in which modern society dwells represents a real tragedy. People, like automatons, function within a system that uses them, not the other way around. The constant rush, the lack of time for reflection, the fear of loneliness, and the need to face oneself lead to the most important questions remaining unanswered. It is the awareness of the inevitability of death and the finitude of time that should become a powerful stimulus for profound transformation, for the transition to a more conscious and fulfilling life. The final question, arising too late, becomes a cry of the soul, pleading for awakening. This is an invitation to radically change the life paradigm, from a life subordinated to the interests of other people and the system, to a life lived in accordance with one's own needs and truth. Jung argued that it is never too late to start living authentically, but the sooner a person embarks on this fascinating journey to oneself, the fuller and more authentic their life will be. One should not postpone important decisions until health, energy, or time resources are exhausted, because by that time many opportunities may be unavailable. It is advisable to set aside time for self-analysis now, ask oneself key questions, and answer them honestly. Despite the finitude of life, its true value is determined not by duration, but by the richness of experiences and the correspondence to one's own essence. In this regard, Jung calls for courage, the courage to stop avoiding oneself, to abandon imposed roles, and to begin an authentic life. It is necessary to strive to find a meaning that is not superficial or brought in from the outside, but comes from the very depths of our being. Only in this way can one experience true joy, satisfaction from the realization of desires, and find a meaning that no one can take